back. Hey guys, it's Rishi once again. This is our second part of our functions chapter in our Python series. If you haven't seen part 1, please click the link below in our description and then you'll be able to start from scratch. So without further ado, let's crack on with part 2 of our functions. Brilliant. So we're now going to be touching onto default values. And when writing a function, you can define a default value for each parameter. And if an argument for a parameter is provided in the function call, Python uses that argument value. If not, it uses the parameter's default value, as you had seen in the previous video. So when you define a default value for a parameter, you can simply exclude the corresponding argument that you'd usually write in the function call. And so using default values can simplify your function calls and clarify the ways in which your functions are typically used. For example, if you notice throughout most of the calls to describe pet, they're being used to describe our pet dog, Millie, or hamster, Zion, or the cat, Leo. So if we set a default value of animal type to dog, now anyone calling describe pet for a dog can omit that information. And let's see how they can go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and copy out the above code and paste it below here. But this time I'm going to change the order and start off with pet name. And then I'm going to put animal type as my default value and put it as dog. And then go ahead and call this function with my pet name equaling Leo. So now if I go ahead and run this, we can now see I have a dog and my dog's name is Leo. So what have we done here? We've simply gone ahead and changed the definition of describe pet. So it can include a default value, and that is dog for animal type. And now when the function is called with no animal type specified, Python knows to use the value dog for this parameter. And note that the order of parameters in this function definition had to be changed because the default value makes it unnecessary to specify a type of animal as an argument. So the only argument left in the function call is this pet's name, and that is being called here in line 46. And now that argument will match up with the first parameter, which is pet name, and this is the reason the first parameter needs to be pet name. And so the simplest way to use this function now is to provide just a dog's name in that function call. So we can simply take this away and then go ahead and run the program. And you can now see we're getting the same output here. And this function call would have the same output as the previous example, as you can see. The only argument provided is Leo, so it is matched up with the first parameter in the definition, pet name. And because no argument is provided for animal type, Python uses the default value, which is dog. And to describe an animal other than a dog, you could then use a function call, and let's see how we can do that. So I'm going to go ahead and call describe pet again, but this time I'm going to put in my pet name and link this to Harry, followed by my animal type and link that to hamster. And then again, because an explicit argument is set for animal type and that's provided, Python is now going to simply ignore the default value. So let's see what we get in our output. And there we are. You can now see I have a hamster and my hamster's name is Harry. So one point to note here, when you use default values, any parameter with the default value needs to be listed after all of the parameters that don't have default values. And this allows Python to continue interpreting positional arguments correctly. And that brings me to my second point. Let's now dive into equivalent function calls. So because positional arguments, keyword arguments, and default values can all be used together, often you'll have several equivalent ways to call a function. So let's consider the following definition for describe pets with one default value provided. So now with this definition, an argument always needs to be provided for pet name. And this value can be provided using the positional or keyword format. And now if the animal being described is not a dog, an argument for animal type must be included in the call, and this argument can also be specified using the positional or keyword format. So let's now take a look at all of the different calls that would work for this function. And let's call our describe pet and go for Millie. And then we'll go for describe pet and we'll say pet name equals Millie. And then let's do the same, but this time a cat named Zion. And then it's called describe pet here. And let's go for Zion, followed by the animal type, which is a cat. And then it's called describe pet one more time. And this time we're going to go for pet name and we'll equal it to Zion, followed by our animal type, and we'll equal that to our cat before going to the final one. And let's go for describe pet. And again, let's go for animal type equals cat, followed by pet name equals Zion. So each of these function calls would now have the same output as the previous example. And it doesn't really matter which styling call that you use. As long as your function call produces the output that you want, just use that style that you find easiest to understand. So let's now move over to the second section, which is avoiding argument errors. So when you start using functions, don't be surprised if you encounter errors about unmatched arguments. Now, unmatched arguments simply occur when you provide fewer or more arguments than a function needs to do its work. So let's see what happens if we try to call describe pet with no arguments. So let's go ahead and copy this one here. And let's see what happens if we try to call describe pet with no arguments. So you can now see we get a type error. It's missing one required positional argument, which is under pet name. So what happens here is that Python recognizes that some information is missing, and that is again told to us by our traceback. So again, it tells us the location of the problem, which is in line 69, allowing us to look back and see that something went wrong in our function call. And then the offending line just simply is written out for us to see and tells us that the call is now missing and reports the names of the missing arguments. And that is again, pet name. And now, if the function were in a separate file, we could probably rewrite the call correctly without having to open the file and read the function code. And again, Python is helpful in that it reads the function's code for us and tells us the names of the arguments that we need to provide. So this is another motivation for giving your variables and functions descriptive names. And if you do get Python's error messages, this will be more useful to you in the long run and anyone else who might use your code. But remember, if you provide too many arguments, you should get a similar traceback error that can help you correctly match your function call to that function definition. Brilliant. So this brings us to the end of our second section. I've now got 3 programs that I would like you to dive into. So please go ahead and pause the video before playing again, where we will go through the solutions. Welcome back. I hope those 3 programs were useful and you were able to utilize all of the skills that you learnt from our second section. Let's now dive into our Chapter 7 solutions, where we will be going through each of the 3 programs. Now, our first program here, we have to write a function called makeShirt that accepts the size and the text of a message that should be printed on that shirt. And the function should print a sentence summarizing the size of the shirt as well as the message. So let's go ahead and call our function once using our positional arguments to make a shirt. And then let's call the function a second time using our keyword arguments. So let's begin with defining our make_shirt. And within this, we're going to have 2 parameters. We'll have size and we'll have message. Don't forget to add in your colon at the end. And then let's go ahead and put our doc string in place. And we'll just say to summarize the shirt that's going to be made. And then let's go ahead and print this out using the format method. Let's put a new line in place and say, I'm going to make a, and then let's put in our placeholder, which is size. And then we'll go for our t-shirt. And then we'll put one more print statement. And this time we will say it will say, and we'll use our single quotations for this because we are going to use our double quotations for our brackets, and we'll go for message and finish off with our single quotation, and there we are. So now we've gone ahead and called our function. We've got our two parameters here. We've got our place value holder for our parameter size and for our parameter message. And now we need to go ahead and call our function. So let's go for make shirt. Let's outline large. And then let's also write down I love Python. And then let's call it once more. But this time we're going to put in our message. The size matters. Followed by our size, which equals, and we'll go for medium. Okay, brilliant. So now we can go ahead and run this code right away. And we can now see I'm going to make a large t-shirt. It would say I love Python. And I'm going to make a medium t-shirt and it would say the size matters. And you can now see that we've got two different messages, and one which is using our positional arguments and the second which is using our keyword arguments. I hope that was now clear. Let's move over into the second section. So this is where we have our large shirts, and we need to modify the make shirt function so that the shirts are large by default with a message that reads, I love Python. So let's go ahead and define our make shirt, but this time because we need to make it large by default, I'm going to set my default value size equals large, and then also a message which is default, and I'll put I love Python. I'm then going to put my doc string and again summarize the shirt that's going to be made before printing this using our F method here, and I'll get my new line and then printing this out, but I'll simply go ahead and copy my two print statements above and paste them below here before calling make shirt here, and then I'll call a make shirt again, but this time I will declare my size as medium, and then I'll call make shirt one more time, and this time I'll put both. I'll put small as my first argument and a second argument that just states programmers are smart. So we've now gone ahead and modified the make shirt function so that the shirts again are large by default, and so is the message being default. And then we've gone ahead and made a large shirt, which is here, and then a medium shirt with a default message, and then the shirt of any size here with a different message. So let's go ahead and print this out. Amazing. So let's see what it says here. We've now got, I'm going to make a large t-shirt, and it will say I love Python, and it's the same for the medium. But for the last one, I'm going to make a small t-shirt, and it will say programmers are smart. So let's see what my code has done here. At first, I called out the function, which simply printed out my default values, which was the size being large and message being Python, I love Python, which is here. I then called out the function once again, and this time I've simply gone ahead and made the default value medium, but the message remains the same. So you can now see that the medium has been added on and replaced instead of large. Before finally calling the function one more time, and then changing both of my arguments from one being small, which relates to my size, and then my message being that programmers are smart. And you can now see that has taken full effect. All right, brilliant. Let's go to the final program here. So in the final program, we need to write a function called describe city. So let's define our describe city here. And it needs to accept two parameters. One is the name of a city and one is their country. So let's go to country and let's put India. And then we're going to go ahead and put our doc string and we'll just say describe a city. And again, it's always important to ensure that your structure is neatly written out, not just for you, but for anybody else who would be reading your code. And let's go ahead and write in our message and use our format method here and simply go for city.title, as we learned in our previous chapter. And then we close that off, is in, before starting a new one, country.title, before closing that as well. And then let's go ahead and print our message. Beautiful. And don't forget, we've now given our city a positional argument, whilst our country is now our default. And please remember now that we've given our country parameter a default value, and we now need to call our function 3 different times for 3 different cities. So let's go ahead and start that off. Let's go for describe city. Let's go for Santiago. We'll then go for describe city again, and we'll go for a different city and a country. And we'll go for Veli, and then we'll go for describe city again. And this time we'll go for London, which is our city, and the country being United Kingdom. And then for our last one, let's go for Mumbai. And again, what is this going to print out? It's going to print that Delhi is in India, which is our default value. But then we've gone ahead and changed this to London is in United Kingdom, which is replacing our default value. And then finally, stating that Mumbai is in the country India. So let's save this and let's run this. And we can now see we've got Delhi is in India, London is in United Kingdom, and Mumbai is in India. So I hope that was now clear on how we can not only work with multiple function calls, but also go through our positional arguments as well as our default values and see how they work together in order to give us our results. Let's now move back to our functions folder here, where we will now be moving over to return values. So what are return values? Now, as we saw in the previous chapter, a function doesn't always have to display its output directly. Instead, it can process some data and then return a value or a set of values. And the value that the function returns is called a return value. And the return statement takes a value from inside a function and then sends it back to the line that called that function. And so return values allow you to move much of your program's grunt work into functions, which can simplify the body of your program. So let's take a look at a function that takes a first and last name and then returns a neatly formatted name. So I'm going to go ahead and define get formatted name with two parameters, which is first name and last name. Put my colon and then again my doc string, and let's return a full name neatly formatted. Wonderful. Within my full name, I'm again going to use the concatenation method, and I'm going to equal my first name plus, let's give it some space, and then my last name. And then I'm going to return my full name dot title. And then don't forget to call your function. Let's go for musician, and let's equal get formatted name. So we're calling our function. And then let's put two arguments for our first name and last name. Let's go for Alex. Well, let's not put our capital, Alex. And let's go for Fuller. And then let's go ahead and print this out. Oh, we've got a traceback error. So we're looking at line 69, describe pet, and it's missing one required positional argument, which is pet name. So let's dive into this. So this was the argument error that we were working with last time. So let's go ahead and simply comment this out, clear our terminal, and run our code once again. And we should now be able to see Alex Fuller being printed out neatly. So I hope you're proud of yourself because you've come a long way. In the beginning, we were simply working through using the simple concatenation method, declaring two variables, first name and last name, and then printing out a third variable, which is full name. But now we're working with functions here. And this is again doing the same thing, but now working with our two parameters, first name and last name, and then using our return value. And that's again returning our full name. So let's dive into this in a little bit more detail here. We've got our definition, get formatted name, and it takes the parameters first and last name. We then go ahead and combine this, declaring a new variable, which is full name. And the value of full name is now converted into title case and then returned to the calling line in line 78. And so when you call a function that returns a value, you need to provide a variable where the return value can be stored. So in this case, the return value is now stored in the variable musician. And then the output shows a neatly formatted name made up of the parts of a person's name. And this might seem like a lot of work to get a neatly formatted name when we could have just written print Alex Fuller. But when you consider working with a large program that needs to store many first and last names separately, functions like this become very useful. And you store first and last names separately and then call that function whenever you want to display a name. But what about making an argument optional? Sometimes it makes sense to make an argument optional so that people using the function can choose to provide extra information only if they want to. So let's take an example and let's expand on get formatted name, just so we can handle middle names as well. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this out as well as comment this out. And this time I'm going to simply go ahead and add middle name in the middle here. And we're going to keep everything the same, except we will go ahead and add middle name here. And then put in our middle name here as well in line 88, where we will be calling our function. So now that we've gone ahead and done that, this function works when given a first, middle, and last name. And the function takes in all three parts of the name and then builds a string out of them. We then go ahead and add our spaces where appropriate and convert this to our dot title case. So let's go ahead and run this right away. And we can now see we are getting Alex Roy Fuller. But middle names aren't always needed now. And this function as written would not work if you tried to call it with only a first name and a last name. So to make the middle name optional, we can give the middle name argument an empty default value and then simply ignore the argument unless the user provides a value. So how are we going to work without a middle name? Do we need to set the default value of middle name to an empty string and then move it to the end of the list of parameters? Let's have a look. So I'm going to take our middle name here and then move it to the end, and this time make it equal to an empty string. But now we're going to change this a little bit. We're going to have to put in an if statement to say if there is a middle name, then print out the following here. Otherwise, print out your first name and your last name. So let's go ahead and put in our if statement and say if middle name followed by our colon, then go ahead and print out full name, which consists of first name, middle name, and last name. Else, let's go for our else here. We simply go ahead and copy out our full name here, which is just consisting of our first name as well as our last name. Before then again, returning our full name dot title. And then we just need to call the function twice. One which will have three values, which is your first name, your middle name, and your last name. And one which is simply made up of our first name and last name. And let's go ahead and change these arguments as well. Okay, wonderful. And let's go ahead and print this out and see what our output is. And there we are. We've now got Alex Fuller Roy and Rishi Bagga. So in this example, the name is built up of three values. And because there's always a first and last name, these parameters are listed first in the function's definition. The middle name is optional, as you can see here. So it's listed last in the definition, and its default value is seen as empty. So then what happens in the body of our code? So in the body of the function, we check to see if middle name has been provided. So Python interprets the non-empty string as true. So middle name evaluates to true if a middle name argument is in the function call. And so if the middle name value is provided, then the first name and the last name are combined to form a full name. And the name is then changed to a title case, as you can see here, where it is stored in the variable full name, and then returned to the calling line here, where it is stored in musician and printed. And so because we are calling this function with a first name and last name, if we're using a middle name, however, we have to make sure that the middle name is the last argument passed, so Python will match the positional arguments correctly. Otherwise, as you have seen here, we've got Alex Fuller Roy, which means Fuller has now changed from our last name to our middle name. So what do we need to do to rectify this? Simply get our Roy here and place that at the back. And now if we go ahead and run this, we can now see we get the right output, which is Alex Roy Fuller. So again, I hope you had noticed that before I went through it. And then the modified version of our function now works for people with just a first name and last name, and it works for people who have a middle name as well. So please remember that optional values allow functions to handle a wide range of use cases while letting function calls remain as simple as possible. So I hope that was now clear. And let's think about what we've done in the past. And what if we wanted to simply work with a dictionary within our function? How would that work? Now we know that a function can return any kind of information that you need it to, including more complicated data structures. So let's take a look at an example and let's follow a function that takes in parts of a name and returns a dictionary representing a person. So before I go ahead and do that, I'm going to comment out my code and then clear my terminal. So we're going to go by defining a function, and let's call this build person. And this again could be through building a user profile within a project of yours, showcasing many use cases. So let's go ahead and we've declared two of our parameters, first name and last name, and let's go ahead and put our doc string here. We'll then go ahead and declare person as our dictionary, use our curly braces, and then let's go for our key to value pairs. So we got first, which links to first name, and then we've got last, which links to last name, before returning person. And then we go ahead and call our musician and make that equal to build person because we're calling our function here. And then let's put in our name, which is our first name, and our last name before printing out musician. So the function build person simply takes a first and last name and packs these values into the dictionary. So the value of first name is stored in the key first, and the value of last name is stored in the key last. And the entire dictionary representing the person is then returned, and the returned value is simply printed with the original two pieces of textual information that are now stored in a dictionary. So let's go ahead and run this. And you can now see that the function is simply taking simple textual information and puts it into a more meaningful data structure that lets you work with the information beyond just printing it. And the strings Rishi and Bagger are now labeled as first name and last name. And you can simply extend this function to accept optional values like a middle name, an age, an occupation, or any other information that you want to store about a person. For example, let's now take a look at adding age here. So let's go and put in our if statement and say if age, let's go for person, and let's call our age is equal to age, we'll then return our person. But remember, we need to go ahead and put in our value here, which is our optional value, which is age equals, and then followed by an empty string. And then we can go ahead at the end and simply because this is the last parameter, we need to make our argument the last position here. And let's go for age equals 25. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and print this out. And again, this should allow us to store a person's age as well, which it now has done here, age equals 25. So what have we done? We've gone ahead and added a new optional parameter age to the function definition and assigned the parameter to an empty default value. And now if the function call includes a value for this parameter, then the value will be stored in the dictionary. And the function always stores a person's name, but it can also be modified to store any other information about a person. And the next stage will be now to use a function within a while loop. And just as we've done for an if statement here, you can use functions with all of Python's structures that you've learned about so far. So let's now go ahead and comment this out and let's work on that. So I'm going to go ahead and take the above program here, which was based on first name and last name, and let's work with this below here. So let's take a look at this get formatted name function, and let's add in our while loop. So just under our return full name.title, I'm going to add on an infinite loop. And that is where I'm going to state while true, let's print the following. And let's go for an input statement. So let's ask the user to please tell me your name. And remember to neatly structure this by putting a colon at the end with a space. And then let's go for our first name, which equals input first name, followed by the same, but for our last name, before simply calling our formatted name here, which is again within the while loop as we must. And let's go for formatted name equals get formatted name. And then within this, we can just simply call our F name and our L name, and then printing out a message. And let's go for a new line. Let's go for hello, followed by their formatted name. So let's go ahead and clear the terminal and let's run this once more. Wonderful. So it now says, please tell me your name. Let's go for Rishi and Bagger. And now you can see it's printing out hello, Rishi Bagger. Now for this example, we've simply just used a simple version of our get formatted name that doesn't involve any middle names. The while loop then comes into action and asks the user to enter their name, and we prompt for their first and last name separately. But there's one problem. We haven't defined our quit statement. But there's one problem. We haven't defined our quit condition. So where do we put our quit condition when you ask for a series of inputs? Now we want the user to be able to quit as easily as possible. So each prompt should offer a way to quit. And that's where we're going to bring our break statement. And that offers a straightforward way to exit the loop at either prompts. So let's simply make our edit to this while statement. So now under our please tell me your name print statement, we're going to go and add another print statement and ask the user to enter Q at any time to quit. And then we need to add in a if statement that simply says if F name equals Q, then break, or if L name equals Q, then break. So let's separate this further and let's go for if F name, and again, remember our double equal sign is our equality operator. Then let's go for break, and we'll do the same thing here, and we'll just paste it below here and change that to L name. And now that we've gone ahead and done that, we can simply print this out. And there we are. Let's go ahead and add our first name, followed by our last name. But this time, instead of putting my last name, I'm going to enter in Q, and you can now see hello Rishi Q. That's giving us an error. So let's go and see what we've done wrong here. So within our if statement, we've got if F name equals to Q, then break. And again, I'll simply remove this here. We've got our print statement, which is enter Q at any time to quit. And then we've gone for our F name input first name. So if we go ahead and print this out, we can now see it's asking us to tell us our name and then enter Q at any time to quit. So let's go ahead and type in Rishi, and then last name is Q, and it's now quit for us. And let's run it one more time, and let's go for Q for the first name, and then once again, it's exited our program here. So we've gone ahead and we've added our message that informs the user how to quit, and then we've used our break statement to exit out of the loop if the user enters the quit value at either prompt. And now the program will continue greeting people until someone enters Q for either name. So I hope that was now clear. I've now got 2 programs for you that I would like you to dive into. Again, focusing on everything we've done in our second section. So please feel free to pause the video here and then press play when you are ready. Thank you. Welcome back. Let's now dive into our programs folder, which is Chapter 7 Solutions, and let's get started. So in this particular program, we have to write a function called city_country, and that just simply takes in the name of the city and the country, and then return a string formatted like the one below, Santiago and Chile. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go ahead and write out a function which takes two parameters, one which is city, one which is country. I'm then going to go ahead and write out my doc string and then a return statement. So as you can see, that's now been done. And then I'm going to go ahead and call this function 3 times, just so I can see the 3 city and country pairs. And that is all being done for you here. We can go ahead and print this out, and we can now see we've got our 3 responses here. And that again is based on the previous program that we had created together with our countries. Okay, let's move over to our next program here. And this is where we need to write a simple function make album and just build a dictionary describing that music album. So we're going to take 2 parameters, which is artist and album title, and then simply create our album dictionary before returning it, and then simply making a function call which includes our information. So let's go ahead and write this out. So we've got our function make album with our 2 parameters, artist and title. We then have our doc string and our album dictionary, which is showcasing our key to our value, and again our key to our value here. And then again, it asks us to simply add an optional parameter that allows you to store the number of tracks on an album. And if the calling line includes a value of number of tracks, then add that value to the dictionary as well. So let's go ahead and print that out here. And there we are. We've got our 3 different types of albums here. And we're going to go ahead and print this out. And you can now see we've got this in our structured format where we have each of the 3 different albums associated with the title and the artist. And so let's now go over the second section of this program where we are adding an optional parameter to store the number of tracks on an album. So let's simply start off by adding another parameter here, and let's go for tracks equals 0. We are then going to put in an if statement, which is just below here, and start off by saying if tracks album underscore dictionary has tracks within it, then return the album dictionary. And then let's go for the last one here, and let's add it to the end, and let's go for tracks equals 8. And we can now simply go ahead and print this out. And you can now see we've got tracks 8. So I hope that was clear to see how we can work with dictionaries describing a music album, how we took the artist's name as well as their title of the album, and then use that function to make these 3 dictionaries representing 3 different albums before working with an additional optional parameter, which is for tracks. Beautiful. And let's now go to our final section, which is 7.8 user albums. And this is where we need to start from our previous program. And that's where we need to simply just write a while loop that allows users to enter an album's artist and title. And then once we have that information, we can call the album with the user's input and then print the dictionary that's created. So let's go ahead and prepare our prompts. And I'm just going to build upon this on the previous one here. So let's go ahead and put our prompts here, which again is what album are you thinking of and who's the artist. And then again, we need to let the user know how to quit as well. Enter here, and we've also put our print statement, which is now asking our user to enter quit at any time to stop before putting our while loop here. So we've got while true. Let's go for title equals input title prompt, and then writing out if title equals quit break. And then we can do the same thing for our artist input, and then we'll go for artist prompt, and then if artist equals quit break. Beautiful. And then this time we can almost comment these out here and then put in one more statement where we are calling our function. So let's go for album equals make album, and then let's have our artist and our title before printing album here. So now that is all done, let's put a further print statement which simply just says thanks for responding before going ahead and printing this out. So let me clear my terminal and let's print out. And there we are. We can now see what album are you thinking of and enter quit at any time to stop. Let's go for Ninth Symphony. Now who's the artist? Let's go for Beethoven. And then again, as you can see, this loop is now ongoing, but we'll press quit. And we've now got the album and the artist, followed by our print statement, which is thanks for responding. So what have we learned today? We started off with default values, working our way through equivalent function calls, avoiding argument errors, and how we can simply return values. Before making an argument optional, we then dived into returning a dictionary and using a function within a while loop. So one of your goals as a programmer should be to write simple code that does what you want it to, and functions help you do this. They allow you to write blocks of code and leave them alone once you know they work. And when you know a function does its job correctly, you can trust that it will continue to work and then move on to the next coding task. Thank you very much once again for watching our video. This was the end of the functions part 2. We still have one more part in our functions chapter where we will then be going through lists and modifying a list within a function. So use this time wisely so you can get up to speed with functions and practice on a daily basis in this video as well as our previous functions video. Don't forget to like and subscribe our page for when we release our third part for our functions video. Keep up the great work and I'll see you then. Thank you.